Sit right down and I'll show you where my dreams began.
I'm Michael Dugan, your culinary host, guiding you through the chef's journey. Join me at the chef's table, where you'll experience stories, secret sauces, signature dishes, and kitchen disasters. Today on the show, you'll meet Chef Traci Calderon. She runs the Atrium Kitchen and Cooking School in Seattle, Washington's Pike Place Market. But she also runs Nourished Neighborhoods. You'll learn about this amazing organization and how together with her volunteers, they have fed over 35,000 people in need in the Seattle area during the pandemic. She'll also share stories about her childhood, growing up, how she became a chef, and her passion for cooking and helping the community. Chef Traci, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
It's a real pleasure and an honor. Chef Traci, can you tell us about your childhood and your family life growing up and how that shaped you into becoming a chef?
Growing up, I am the baby of 5. I have 3 older brothers and an older sister. It was often that my sister and I would be playing in the backyard and we'd be playing restaurant, taking mud cakes and making them into pretend food. And it was, I was thinking about that recently. I think that that's where it started. We were playing pretend restaurant in the backyard, and I was talking with another chef friend, and he said the same thing. He and his brother would make food out in the yard and pretend to bring things to their mom. And I think that it started that early on. My parents both loved cooking. My dad owned a heating and air business. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She did the books for my dad. She literally was the mom that had hot cookies waiting when we came home from school.
What kind of cookies?
Usually chocolate chip or oatmeal raisin. Her Christmas cookies were something that we all look forward to. But mom would cook pretty much Monday through Friday, and dad would get in the kitchen on the weekends. And they had a really nice rapport in the kitchen, and I witnessed that. I experienced it growing up, and I think that that's where my foundation for the love of food started.
What kind of meals did you have? Were they home, like down home cooked meals, or what kind of cuisine?
My father's Mexican. His father came from Mexico in 1919, I believe. My mom was from Pennsylvania. 2 very different cultures. The best way to get a picture of how I grew up eating, on New Year's Day, the family tradition was to have tamales and sauerkraut and kielbasa. So I had both regions of my parents' lives represented in food. My mom learned how to make Mexican food from my dad's father, and her enchiladas and tacos, chili rellenos, they were the best ever. And she could throw down with any Mexican mama. But she was from Pennsylvania. My dad, he would do this great beef burgundy dish that I still think about. And I've actually cooked for our seniors a few times. But my mom and dad both loved cooking. And if I got to do it all over again, I would have went straight into being a chef versus the detour I took to public relations.
Okay. And can you take us forward past your childhood and let us know a little bit more about how things developed in your career?
So as a chef, I took a detour from public relations into, I became my mom's caregiver. She was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. And it was in taking care of her that I was starting to prepare meals for she and my dad and leave them in their fridge. And I realized that that's actually a service that people need, not just people facing illness, but busy people. And to have hot, nourishing meals that they didn't have to cook themselves, or they weren't picking up takeout. It was in that transition time of both my mom's transition of her life, but also as a transition time for myself. So I left public relations behind me, became a caregiver for my mom, and then eventually I was able to get my mom into a really great daycare center, and I got to go back to being her daughter versus being her caregiver. And I decided at that point that I was going to look into becoming a personal chef. And I started cooking for one family, and I was their private chef, and then grew my business from there.
And I think you mentioned something before about cooking school. Did you go to cooking school?
I turned 40 soon after my mom passed away, and I was newly divorced. So 3 major life events. And I decided I was going to take myself to Italy and go to a cooking school. And I spent 3 weeks in Italy, absolutely fell in love with it. That was really the start of my specialty gourmet food line. And I totally blame Italy for the name of it.
Okay.
It was Seductive Specialty Foods. It seemed like a great idea at the time. I figured out how to bottle my own products, and I got certified as a food processor. I figured it out. So it was yet another way. So I went from being a private chef to a personal chef to a caterer, having a gourmet food line, and then eventually started leading food tours at Pike Place Market, and eventually took over the Atrium kitchen at Pike Place Market.
And what was that like?
It was one of those opportunities in my life where I knew the answer could only be yes, and I would trust that I would figure it out. So I was approached by the market when they decided that they were no longer going to manage the Atrium kitchen, and I used to rent it from them. When they asked me if I was interested in taking over, I said yes. I would figure out how I was going to pay for it after that. It was a big leap of faith. I trusted that this was the right path for me to be on.
I always ask our chefs, what fork in the road did they come across? And it sounds like you came across a couple forks.
Yes, it was a full drawer of cutlery. There were forks, knives, and spoons in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and life doesn't take a linear path.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Atrium kitchen? What kind of food do you serve, and what is an experience like there?
So at the Atrium kitchen pre-pandemic, I would do food tours where I would take groups through the market. We would shop for our ingredients directly there at the market and bring everything back to the Atrium kitchen and make a meal together. So it was part tour, part cooking class. I did that for, visitors to Pike Place Market, as well as corporate team building. I did several team building challenges. If you think Chopped and Top Chef, I did a mashup of those two culinary competitions and would break corporate teams into small groups. It was always a way to have fun with food, and that was really important to me, but also to make really good food. And then I started 2 programs, Nourished Neighborhood, which was a free community meal. All of the meals that we served at Nourished Neighborhood were based on my family recipes. I would, do a full meal. So a big salad to start, side dishes, a main course, dessert, and a beverage. And that was completely staffed by volunteers. And then also Kindness in the Kitchen, which is a pay it forward pop-up breakfast we did on Friday mornings. And that was just down home cooking. Think biscuits and gravy, breakfast burritos. They were a favorite of our folks that would come for breakfast. And then the catering, higher end events. In the evening time, I have the ability to rent out the Atrium, cater private events that way. So I've done some weddings, wedding receptions, birthday parties, corporate events, corporate fundraising, private auctions.
Tell me a little bit about your volunteers. I'm really curious because you were talking about one who was 22.
So Jonah is a photographer.
Okay.
And he went to school for photography. He needed some gig work in between his catering or his photography jobs.
Uh-huh.
And his brother actually recommended him to me. And he came and he would help with the catering jobs. And then when the pandemic hit, he came to help with the kindness in the kitchen breakfast that we did. That's when I decided to start doing the senior meals. And I told him I would pay him as long as I could. And that March 2020, he, at some point, he stopped clocking in. So I went to run payroll at the end of the month. And I'm like, Jonah, you haven't been clocking in. And he's like, well, I wanted to volunteer.
Oh my gosh.
And I immediately started crying. And he's been volunteering ever since. So whenever, like in December, I had 2 catering jobs and I was able to pay him.
Mm-hmm.
That made me happy. And then Eric, I've known Eric not real well. We would see each other around the market. He was between jobs. He'd gotten actually laid off when the pandemic hit from his job. Eric came, volunteered with Jonah and I. So it was the 3 of us that started doing the senior meals. Then Brittany came. Brittany sent me a message through Instagram. She was moving here from Boston, her and her boyfriend. And she'd been following Atrium Kitchen at Pike Place Market on Instagram and sent me a message that she'd love to come volunteer to help with these free meals for seniors. She fit right in. And I've surrounded myself with 3 excellent human beings. And I absolutely adore them.
That's really special. Volunteers, the right volunteers are priceless.
They really are. And it's kind of funny because Eric was always our DJ. He was in charge of music. And one day he put on New Orleans brass music, the brass band. And that's my favorite kitchen music to this day. I love it. But they each bring something special. Jonah is a rock. He is kind and nice, and it's really hard to fluff him up. He's so calm no matter what's going on. Eric is an excellent baker. Brittany is kind. She's a flight attendant for Delta, and she was furloughed for several months. And, Delta has their Delta graciousness, and it definitely translated. And she's just very, very kind.
They sound like heroes to me.
They are, yes. They are definitely my heroes.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You don't know what to make for dinner again? You want to explore new cuisines but you don't have time? What if you have new inspirations and we provide you with the ingredients and recipes? We know you want to travel, learn new foods, explore the world, but life's responsibilities keep getting in your way. What if you can bring those experiences to your home neatly packed into a box? Ladybug Collective is a subscription service that finds real people from around the world to create beautifully curated assortments of recipes, ingredients, and cultural content. Not only do we include cultural ingredients, but also a set of detailed recipe cards with instructions on how to use them. Each box also has a QR code that when scanned takes you to tons more global exploration to immerse yourself in. Everything from film to lifestyle, art to history, it all can be found here. Live your life to the fullest. Subscribe now and don't miss out on the next cultural adventure. Ladybug Collective. Always exploring.
How do you find good volunteers for Nourished Neighborhood?
They find me. The people that sought me out to volunteer were automatically good volunteers because they saw the need for what we were doing, and they wanted to be of service in that way. So I think that someone that doesn't feel it the same way, someone that, food isn't their passion, it's not their love language, they're not going to seek a volunteer opportunity that is serving people. I really believe that the great volunteers that I've worked with over the last 3 years have found me.
And how many meals have you served?
At the Nourished Neighborhood community lunch, we had served 9,100 meals.
Mm-hmm.
Since the pandemic started, we started cooking free meals for seniors, and we've served over 25,000 free meals.
That is incredible.
It's a lot of food. And I've cooked all different cuisines. We were counting the different regions and cuisines that I've cooked, and we came up with 17 different ethnic menu items that we've gotten creative with.
How many volunteers do you currently have?
I currently have 3. So Jonah, Eric, and Brittany.
I would think that you have more volunteers sometimes when things get busier, or
Pre-pandemic, when we were doing the free community lunch, I would have anywhere from 6 to 14 volunteers. And I had a couple, like Pam. Pam was able to volunteer every single month at our community lunch. She's an amazing human being. I absolutely love her and adore her. She was kind of my head volunteer, and she would be great about training the new people that would come in. I had a couple corporate groups. A group from Wells Fargo came in a couple times, actually. And then I had folks from Visit Seattle came and volunteered at one of our lunches. Bloom Projects, which is a construction project management company, they came and volunteered. The one thing that I always have maximum volunteers was for our Thanksgiving breakfast that we did. And that was Nourished Neighborhood breakfast that we would do Thanksgiving morning. And a lot of the shelters and food banks, the places that give free meals on holidays, they focus on lunch or dinner. And I realized that there was maybe a need for breakfast on Thanksgiving. So I started a Thanksgiving Nourished Neighborhood breakfast. I averaged about 30, 35 volunteers to execute breakfast for over 200 people.
wow. You know, one thing I've noticed is that around holidays, people volunteer. But a sad thing is that other times you need volunteers.
Yes.
So I think it's always a good time. It's always a good time to volunteer.
People are in need 365 days of the year. And it's at the holidays that we hear more about being of service. And it's not that it's not needed at the holidays, but 365 days a year, people need food.
You've talked a lot about your passion for volunteering, but you also have a passion for being a chef. What chef do you admire the most? Or has there been a chef in your life that's mentored you or you've followed in a blog, on TV, reading books?
It's hard to pick one. I would say locally, I worked at Harvest Vine for, I think, just under 2 years. I really admired the executive chef, Joey, as well as the sous chef, Elise. What I realized is that Elise was an anomaly in the industry. She was is a really competent female chef. And there are times that I think of her, kind of ask myself, what would Elise be doing right now? So she really inspired me. Joey's calmness in the kitchen is something that I think back on. You know, if I'm actually going back to the first week of the pandemic, when we started making these meals, Joey reached out because they had closed Harvest Vine. Joey reached out and asked if there was anything he could do to help. And he came and volunteered, he and his son, and he helped make meals those first couple of weeks. And I thanked him, and I told him I couldn't have done it without him. And he said, yes, you could. You needed me to be here to be calm. And he was right.
Yeah.
So I think that Elise and Joey had a direct impact locally. Famous chefs, I love Ina Garten just because she's, in my mind, like us.
As far as food goes, what would you say is the best meal that you've ever cooked?
Harvey Weinman, I think is his name. He was a food editor at Wine Spectator magazine. He was going to a winery out in Woodinville, and the winemaker reached out to me and asked if I could prepare a meal that would go with each of the wines that he wanted Harvey to taste. That meal was probably the best meal I've ever executed on. I made a sable fish. He actually told me that it was the most perfect piece of fish he'd ever had. And I remember the winemaker telling me, he's like, I wanted him to talk about my wine the way he was talking about your food. So that meal I remember fondly. Yeah, sometimes it's just a simple meal.
Can you describe the dish?
Which one?
The sable fish?
It was it was simple. It was miso and lemon. I wrapped it in parchment. It melted in your mouth. The buttery texture of the fish didn't become overwhelmed with any flavor. So you could still taste the fish, but it really heightened the flavors of it.
That sounds really good. I've cooked with miso and seafood, and it really enhances the seafood.
It really does.
What would you say in the entire world, where would your favorite restaurant be?
If I could eat anywhere again, it would be in my family's home kitchen with my mom and dad. That was my favorite kitchen, my favorite restaurant.
What would the meal be?
Probably tacos with a salad and fresh sliced avocado. My dad's homemade salsa from his habaneros he grew in the backyard. My mom always loved making desserts as well. Lemon meringue pie was one of my dad's favorite desserts, so she made that often. If I could choose anywhere in the world, it would be to go back to that kitchen.
What would you say are your 3 signature dishes from the Atrium kitchen?
My baby back ribs, which actually attempting to do a pop-up right now. And I say attempting because who starts a restaurant in the middle of a pandemic? Me, apparently.
Yeah, that's great.
It's another way for me to try and hustle and generate some revenue. But my baby back ribs are a signature dish. My version of my mom's enchiladas, my ragu sauce that I learned how to make in Italy and modified to my lasagna. So really the lasagna with the ragu sauce.
And when you talk about sauces, there are core sauces in European cuisine: bechamel, hollandaise, sauce tomate, espagnole. What are your core sauces for the Atrium?
The ragu sauce is one of my core sauces. I can put that on anything. I do an orange guajillo sauce that I usually will cook chicken in. I'll braise chicken thighs in it. And that's one of the core sauces I really enjoy making. And then the whiskey barbecue sauce, which we just bottled, and I say we, Urban Farm is one of the farmers at Pike Place Market. He sells dry rubs and he grows these really amazing Scotch bonnet peppers. And I'm using his Scotch bonnets in my whiskey barbecue sauce from the days when I had products. That sauce is pretty much on everything right now on the menu.
It sounds really good. What is it that makes you passionate about the food that you cook, Nourished Neighborhood, and what you do?
I think that having the ability to nourish people and to connect with people through food is what drives me. I've always found ways to volunteer my time to a variety of different causes, but feeding people and being of service in that way, that fuels me at a time when I'm not generating any revenue.
Right.
And yet I will plan and execute 350 to 700 meals a week for seniors for free. You don't do that for any other reason than passion, just the opportunity to nourish people, not just through the food, but through connecting with them. You know, some of my seniors don't see many people during the week, but they see me when I deliver their meals. So knowing that I can bring nourishment to others.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I can really feel the passion that you have, and it's really incredible. So on the lighter side, tell me about a kitchen disaster that you've had.
There were a few.
You can pick one. You can tell us two, but just maybe one.
The most humorous, I can laugh about it now, was being really excited to be asked by Hormel to do their signature cream cheese stuffed jalapenos wrapped in bacon for the Bacon and Beer Fest that was taking place at Safeco Field. I said yes. I was so excited. What I failed to realize until I was in the middle of it is that I was taking fresh jalapenos, having to take the seeds out of fresh jalapenos. At a certain point, after 22 hours of taking seeds out of jalapenos to put cream cheese in them and wrap them in bacon, and then cook them all off and then transport them, it was absolutely ridiculous. But we were wearing layers of 3-4 gloves because of the seed. Like, there is no way I will ever say yes to stuffing anything in a jalapeno.
Wow.
Disaster? I don't know. I think I'm still trying to recover, and that was 5 years ago.
I can't imagine. That seems overly complex.
And yet it sounds so simple.
It sounds tasty, though.
Just 6,000 was a lot.
6,000.
How do you even estimate how many jalapenos are in a case of jalapenos? I learned a lot, and then I quickly forgot it because I was never going to repeat that again.
And what's the worst meal that you've ever had? Not the worst meal you ever cooked, just the worst meal you've ever had. And we can't use names or restaurants.
No, we can't. I think I'm responsible for some of the worst meals I've had. Because I'll get home, I'll put something in the oven, usually something like frozen waffles, and proceed to forget about it. And then realize I have something in the oven that's now, the consistency of a piece of wood. And I'll still try and eat it because I don't want to actually make any fresh food for myself on certain days. I think I'm responsible for some of the worst meals.
Okay. Is there any special message that you would like our listeners to know about you, about Nourished Neighborhoods, and what you're doing? And how can we help?
Well, Nourished Neighborhood is funded 100% by donations. And I've filed it as a nonprofit. Nourished Neighborhood is now a nonprofit in the state of Washington. I filed the proper paperwork with the IRS to be a 501c3. And I was raising funds before I did any of that. And people were so generous and so kind and wanted to help any way they could. And they're still doing that. I think that if people feel compelled to help us feed seniors, they can make a donation, whether it's a cash donation or an in-kind donation. That was one of the things that I did at the beginning of the pandemic. I put the word out to these restaurants that were having to close basically overnight. And they had food that was going to go to waste. So we made a lot of meals with donated food. But I think we were talking about Bon Jovi. I think that the verse of that song, that when you can't do what you do what you can. And that applies for any point in our life. The other thing that yesterday I had a conversation with a friend, and I was a little bit negative, and I told her that if I fail, it won't be because I didn't try. And I thought about that later, and I realized that was the wrong approach to take to it. The right approach is, when I succeed, it will be because I didn't give up. That success isn't about money. It's not about a car. It's not about a fancy house on a lake, which does sound nice. It's about connecting with people, making them feel seen, letting them know they're important, and showing that through food. And that's what I have right now to give.
That's an incredible gift. Well, Chef Traci, I want to thank you for coming on the show and being with us at Voice for Chefs, and the work that you do, honoring the Seattle community with the service that you provide.
Thank you, Michael.
You can follow Chef Traci by going to Atrium Kitchen, pikeplace.com, Nourished Neighborhoods, donate, and follow her. See what she's up to. Stop by at the Pike Place Market and visit the Atrium Kitchen. Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on Facebook. Find our website in the show notes. Subscribe on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen. Leave a comment with 5 stars, and stay tuned for the next episode of Voice for Chefs.